Society Matters.
Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Education in Motion here on HMTV. My name is Zach Graulich and I'm the Assistant Director of Education here at HMTC. And today I'm joined by Kelly Fives. Kelly Fives is a passionate and creative educator. She spent 9 years as an upper school English teacher at the Churchill School and 4 years as a learning specialist and English teacher at Dwight School, New York. Kelly specializes in curriculum design and Holocaust and genocide education and has participated in several prestigious professional development programs. Through her work, Kelly empowers students to forge meaningful connections with historical narratives, develop empathy, and embrace intellectual risk-taking. She holds a BA and MS from Syracuse University and has a graduate certificate in Holocaust education from Yeshiva University. Kelly, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's special. This is our first ever episode of this series, so you get to be kind of the guinea pig here, and we'll try things out. So to start, I'd love for you to share, how did you first and foremost become an educator? Is that something that you always saw for yourself when you were younger? Tell me about that journey for you.
I never thought that I was, I wouldn't say I never thought that I was going to become an educator, but I went to school, I wanted to study journalism. I was interning at a magazine in the city after my sophomore year. And essentially I was just like, I don't want to work until 6 o'clock. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to become an English teacher, and soon realized that even if school ends, you're still working until 6 o'clock. But I obviously wouldn't trade it for anything.
And why English literature? What about that has always inspired you?
So I love history. I definitely could have been a history teacher, except that I love books so much, and I love books that talk about history, that teach about history, where you can immerse yourself in, another culture, another world. So I kind of saw being an English teacher, well, I was an English major, but I kind of saw being an English teacher as a way to teach about the history and the stories in a way that wasn't so linear. I feel like my history teachers, it was just very linear, it wasn't thematic, and so I didn't really see a pathway for me to become a history teacher when I was in school.
Absolutely, makes sense. So you talked a little bit about how things were different growing up with your history teachers. Do you remember learning about the Holocaust specifically growing up? Was that something that always interested you when it came to just general world history, or did that come for you later on in life?
I was interested in the Holocaust super, super inappropriately early on. I would say in like first or second grade, I was a very early reader, so I read Diary of Anne Frank very early. And then in fifth grade, we read Number the Stars, which I absolutely loved. And I feel like that was the first time I really saw myself in, I grew up around here. I went to Wheatley. I was surrounded by wonderful, wonderful Jewish people in my life. And so the idea of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism was very incomprehensible to me as a kid. And that book, focusing on, rescue and sort of non-Jewish resistance, really opened my eyes, obviously, to those topics, but where I could see myself as having a place in this history. And that kind of launched me into, I would say, an obsession with learning everything there is to know about the Holocaust.
I certainly can relate to that. So when you eventually became a teacher, was the curriculum that had been established already inclusive when it came to the Holocaust, or is that something that you had to yourself kind of embed into your classroom?
Sure. So I was at Syracuse, and Syracuse had this wonderful program called the Specter Warren Fellowship, which basically took undergraduate and graduate students, pre-service teachers. We went for a week to the Holocaust Museum Houston, and that is definitely like the singular most formative experience in my educational career, because going on that program a few months before I graduated, it taught me about teaching the Holocaust. There was professional development through Echoes and Reflections, and I knew that whenever I became a teacher, I was going to have to incorporate this. And I was very fortunate to be in independent schools where I really had full control over what I taught. And so I knew that I could create a curriculum that aligned with the history that the students were learning, the themes that they were talking about in other classes. And so I pretty much exclusively, almost every year that I was an English teacher, I was able to teach the Holocaust and the Cambodian genocide together.
Incredible. So Can share with me and everyone listening, what literature, what books, memoirs did you use in your classroom so that anybody out there listening maybe has some ideas of what they or their kids or grandkids might be reading at those appropriate ages? And what age did you teach?
I taught 10th grade for almost 9 years, and then I taught 11th and 12th grade these past couple of years, and I always taught Salvage Pages, which is a collection of Holocaust diaries put together by Alexandra Zapruder, who I was lucky enough to meet a couple of years ago, which was like a dream come true. And so I taught that. We did, because there's so many diaries, I was able to focus on my favorite person in the world, Peter Ginz. And then we would do some like extra like short stories like Adam by Kurt Vonnegut, and a couple of, sometimes I would do Once We Were Brothers and like my honors book club. And then we would lead into a memoir about the Cambodian genocide. First They Killed My Father.
And what was the response, reception from the students? Because this is obviously difficult history, both the Holocaust and the Cambodian genocide. I mean, talking about hatred of any kind is not easy for the teacher or the students. So what was it like to work with them? Did they seem engaged? Did it depend on the year, on the class? What was that like?
Definitely depended on the year in the class. I think teenagers are wonderful, and they are universally vocal about things that they like and don't like. I think I would say with confidence that even if my curriculum was not the most uplifting, that we found ways to, identify light within darkness. And also, I didn't get to choose the books that I read when I was in English class.
Yeah.
I don't think that kids would. I think the takeaway is probably that they learned a lot about topics from a really passionate person, even if they were upset that like I was making them read very depressing works in the middle of winter.
Understandably. So you spent obviously quite a number of years in that line of profession. Did you, ever have this kind of aha moment from whether it be one student or a whole class that, whether it be the response they gave or the reflection that they gave you or just anything that they shared with you personally that I guess let you know that everything that you've been doing is worth it? Because I think for teachers and educators in any realm of the education world, sometimes you don't always know if you're reaching the kids. You don't always know how effective it is, if they really want to be reading this or if they really care or if they'll remember it when they go home that day. So did you ever have a moment that, kind of you think back and you think that was the moment that I knew my work was really making an impact?
Totally. I have two aha moments. I'm just going to grab my props here. Two aha moments. So about 10 years ago, I had a student who was going to Israel and Poland for spring break. And I was like, what are you going to do in Poland? And she's like, I think we're going to go to the Salt Caves. And I was like, no, you have to go to Auschwitz. Like, you have to go see these places. And we were reading Once We Were Brothers in our honors book club. And she sent me the best email ever that was like, I hope it's okay that I read the whole book on the plane. She was so passionate. And then when she came back from Israel, she got me this book, which was published in 1967, and it's all about resistance. And so it really is so special to me because it's this like older text. I forget where, I think it's 1967. She got it in a bookstore in Israel, and I've kept it ever since. And then, so that was one thing where it was like, you never get anything as a teacher.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes you get like Starbucks gift cards, and obviously every gift is appreciated, but this was so meaningful.
Yeah.
And I, still keep in touch with that student. She's so great. And then this past year, my students, after we read Salvage Pages, we were going to make podcasts. And one of my students was like, oh, do you think I could talk about my great grandmother? Like I think she wrote a book and I could focus on her. And I was like, absolutely, like dive into your family history. And then she brought in this book, which is basically, it's like a testimony that was transcribed by her great grandmother, who lived in the Warsaw Ghetto, was part of the resistance.
Wow.
And so I don't even know if she still has this. Her great-grandmother gave this to her brother for a bar mitzvah, but I have it now. So that was to me, like, again, like having students like step outside of the curriculum and learn about themselves and their history and take something away. Like, I am not someone who is super motivated by grades. Obviously, I want them to learn skills. But for me, this was like a huge, just like personal triumph for that student, that she was able to, and especially being a teacher for a long time, started out with, my grandparents are survivors, or now we're in the generation of great-grandparents.
Yeah.
And so they're really far removed from that history. And so being able to connect to it, I think is just like awesome.
Absolutely. And I think so much of teaching history and literature, reading memoirs, the whole point is to learn about other people's stories, I think, in the hope that it'll allow the kids to reflect on themselves and wonder, wow, what strength that person had, or what an amazing family history that person had. Maybe I have something similar. And I think it inspires a lot of kids to reflect in the way that you said that, especially that student did. And had you not been, teaching in that way and covering that topic in your classroom, I highly doubt that student ever would have had an opportunity in any of their other classes to explore their own family history. So it's great to hear that you provided them with that possibility, and it's even better to know that they kind of took advantage of it in that way, and that you're still in touch with these students, and that you know that the impact you made was real in that moment. Talking about more along the lines of the work you're doing today, you're no longer teaching in the classroom on a daily basis, but you're still teaching through your work with Connect Ed. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like and how that change kind of came to be for you?
Sure. I was in the process of looking for new jobs. I was working in the city. I wanted to come out to Long Island. And so I was looking for jobs, and I knew, something I knew was that the working in independent schools and being able to create my own curriculum, that was something that I probably was not going to get in public schools, but it was okay. And I came back from this trip with the Susan Mendez Foundation this summer, and I just saw this posting for this, senior educator position with Connect Ed. I had never heard of Connect Ed, but it seemed really interesting, and it was new, and it kind of seemed like this space that I was really passionate about, that they're trying to cultivate. And so I applied, and it definitely was a leap, but I think it has been so great to be able to just fully dive into, curriculum that I'm really passionate about, working with, people who are passionate about the same things, and just getting to kind of explore this side I wouldn't say it's been dormant, because I've been able to teach for so long, but where this is really, I have the opportunity to come here and do things. And we went to Yad Vashem. And so things that I haven't been able to do, I've gotten to experience through this new position. We're new, and we do a lot of different things. And we work primarily with independent schools and teachers to talk about a variety of topics, the Holocaust and anti-Semitism being one of them. And it's just great. We have 5 new videos that we just released, and it was so awesome to get to work on the curriculum and sort of picture how other people could use them in their, I think I was always going to be creative about what I did in my classroom, but to be able to create resources and opportunities for other teachers is really special. And just know that even if I'm not reaching the students, they're being reached some way.
Absolutely. And I know that you travel pretty much all over the country when you need to speak to teachers primarily, to give them those tools, because I think teachers, especially in certain parts of the country versus others, they don't have the resources that we, I think in New York State, are a bit more fortunate to have readily accessible. And so with your work with Connect Ed, and I certainly have looked into a lot of Connect Ed's resources, and they're incredible, you've gotten to talk to different people around the world and see kind of, what their thoughts are and what their needs are. So what has that been like for you to talk to so many different people from different communities, and to see how, I guess, even though we are all in different areas, private school, public school, this state, this country, that country, we're all at the end of the day trying to accomplish the same thing when it comes to Holocaust and tolerance education. So what has that been like for you to get to talk to all of these people?
It's amazing, because it's so interesting to see, I was in Canada, and so the focus of the work that I was doing there was really trying to empower educators who are struggling with, this huge wave of anti-Semitism, and figuring out, how to teach about Jewish history and the Holocaust in this current landscape. And even just little things, I was working with teachers, and they were like, these resources are so great, but we work in a French immersion school. Do you have these resources in French? And I'm like, of course not. But I was able to be like, oh, you could use this website, and I gave them the website. It's called Edpuzzle. I'm like, and then you could put the questions in French. And so even those little things that aren't necessarily related to my expertise on these topics, it's really nice to be able to work directly with teachers to share just little light bulbs here and there of how they can, because otherwise that door might be closed. They might not be able to use those resources or teach that topic, but even just little tweaks. And so that's been really special.
Yeah, and to have your expertise as a former, classroom teacher come into play because, for myself, of course, I'm teaching, I'm working with teachers, I'm working with students here at HMTC, but I've never been a classroom educator. So there are certain areas where a teacher maybe would ask me a question about advice for what they're doing in the classroom, and I can certainly help to a degree, but I've never actually been a classroom teacher in that way. So I'm sure you, with your experience, have been able to give that expertise and give resources. And well, when I was a teacher in the classroom, I did this, or we read this, and to give them those ideas and maybe even, a bit more concretely. Because of course, I can recommend books, I can recommend websites, but you yourself has actually done it. You've built that curriculum, you've built those lesson plans, and now you're bringing that to Connect Ed, which is incredibly special for you, I'm sure. And you mentioned earlier that recently you and I were at Yad Vashem. We spent a week together, which is how we kind of got to know one another. We were with educators from all over the world at this international seminar, which was just incredible, I would say. And I'd love to know from you, kind of what were some of your takeaways from that experience? It was your first time in Israel, as it was mine. So what was that experience like for you?
I always wanted to go to Israel on a program for educators. Obviously, not in recent years, but there's been so many opportunities where I could have just gone to visit. I really, really wanted to go on a program. And so being able to go on this Yad Vashem program with Lori, who was my professor in this yeshiva class, and it was amazing. I mean, I feel like everyone says like you have to go to Yad Vashem, but aside from the actual museum, just being able to interact with the people there, we walked around Jerusalem a lot.
Yeah.
And we did all the different things like the Tower of David light show and, went to the Shuk. And so I feel like what was really cool was honestly seeing the other things that they were doing. Like we went to that sort of immersive theater experience on Leo Haas. And I was like, I need this play. I need to write curriculum. And so those experiences are really important to me too, because I might not be in the classroom, but I still want my spark. And I'm trying to go on programs that are like, you must be a public school educator. I'm like, I'll just try. So I'm a hustler in that way. And so that was really cool for me, all the little things that they showed us.
I mean, it was so incredible. And for me as a museum educator, I mean, getting to see their exhibits, I was like in heaven, just, I mean, it was so weird to say like you're in heaven at Yad Vashem, but like I was like, that's my passion. That's where I want to be. And there was never enough time, even though we were there for a full week, I could have spent another week and another week there. But what stood out to me when it came to you is that, the group was primarily museum and memorial educators, but you're not in that category. And as you said, you try to get into these programs, even though you don't necessarily fit within that box that they've outlined in their application. So for you, I'm sure you had a different experience in terms of the information they were providing to us, right?
I definitely think, I almost feel like, not to just sell myself, but I think it's great to have a person like me on these trips because, you, I think, are a little bit different just because you sort of are starting in this education museum space. But we had some people who we were with who had never been in education and now suddenly are running museums and stuff. And so it's kind of nice to have a teacher who can just like butt in and be like, when we saw that play, people were like, oh, it needs to be 20 people. And I'm like, well, that's never going to be a class. There's never going to be a class of 20 kids. Right. And even if you have, okay, the whole grade is coming, you're going to do the play 5 times in one day. That's just not realistic for museum development. So I think it is helpful to have teachers in the space who can kind of poke holes in ideas, but also offer solutions, say, oh, that's really great. But like what, I think we had people there who were like, what if you, were able to rent or buy the technology so that like local theaters could put on the show. And so there's different ways that we were all collaborating. And so that was really cool to be able to see sort of how we could all work together. Yeah,
absolutely. And you certainly weren't the only one there who didn't necessarily fit into that box. But I think that, it was so great, like you said, to have such a diverse group of people there, just in terms of background knowledge and prior careers, current careers. We were all able to offer something. And I think that it's great when programs can do that. And I know there are so many incredible Holocaust education programs, but as you said, they sometimes do set those boxes and some are a bit more lenient with who they let in versus others. But I think that it's important to, make sure that we are opening that door to everybody because everyone has a unique perspective that they can bring to the table, as in this conference that we're talking about. So I'd love for you to speak as we kind of wrap things up here. I know we talked about it earlier, but more concretely, why is Holocaust and tolerance education so important to you? Because I know you love history, you love sharing history, but you could talk about anything with history. It doesn't have to be the Holocaust. It doesn't have to be intolerance. It doesn't have to be racism. So why is that area for you just such a passion?
2 reasons, I will say. The first is that I think a lot of people who are in this field of Holocaust education, there's a personal connection, whether it's, grandchildren of survivors or, being Jewish or having some sort of formative experience. I think for me, I've always had Jewish friends. There's 10 of us from high school, and I'm the only person who is not Jewish. And it has been such an important part of my life to understand Jewish culture and to, be a part of these moments in all my loved ones. I've been at so many different, bar mitzvahs and brises and so I really have felt like there's stories that need to be told. And I think, for me, I'm very passionate about resistance. I'm very passionate about pre-war Jewish life and making sure that we're not just like teaching statistics. And because, I think about, 20 years ago in high school, we were taught bullet points about the Holocaust. And so now being an educator, I'm thinking, well, how did it feel to be, a Jewish student and just see that and have this part of your history? And so I'm really passionate because of my relationships and just the life that I've grown up with. My grandmother's restaurant was in Great Neck. So I was just around, my dad made the best matzo balls I've ever. I just had matzo balls from Second Avenue Deli yesterday. My dad's matzo balls are top tier compared. And so it's just always been really important to me. And I think the second thing is the Holocaust can really teach us about, I don't want to say the Holocaust could teach us about anything.
Yeah.
But it is this really, it's a phenomenon, a time in history where it's so documented, it's modern, but feels like it's in the past. So, we can't teach the, Native American history in the US the same way we can teach the Holocaust because we don't have the documentation.
Right.
We don't have the primary sources in the same way. And so it's a really unique way to kind of teach about other topics through learning about the Holocaust, if that makes sense. I
Absolutely.
feel like,
I think that people sometimes struggle, especially those who are not in this setting that you and I are in every day. They don't really understand necessarily that teaching the Holocaust is not just about teaching about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. You can really learn about any kind of hatred, any genocide that has taken place, just any area of intolerance throughout human history by looking at the Holocaust. And that is why I think when it comes to genocides and acts of hate around the world, the Holocaust is so focused, not only because of how highly documented it is, but that it is such an incredible and smooth stepping stone when it comes to being a classroom educator or a museum educator. You can teach the lessons of any community through analyzing the Holocaust, I think is what you were trying to get to as well.
And now we're seeing this, this explosion, I would say, of Holocaust inversion and Holocaust distortion. And it becomes even more important because now we're not just using, I feel like growing up or in the past 15 years, we've used, lessons of the Holocaust to teach about humanity and to teach about, moral choices. And now we have to do that and combat this misinformation, disinformation, which is, this is the first time I'm encountering that. So I don't have, all the answers or sort of explanations about why this is happening. But I think that it's helping, it's like, it teaches us lessons too. Like, well, we don't have the resources from other times in history that maybe have been forgotten, have been erased. And so we want to make sure that we are preserving the history that we do
Absolutely.
have.
And I love the point that you said, because I feel that for us as Holocaust educators in this day and age, we are kind of having to do both and at the same time. We have to teach the Holocaust while also, I feel, every step along the way combat any denial or distortion that is out there in social media or anything that could possibly come up. For me here at the museum every day, I find myself more than really ever previously, when we talk about Hitler and the Nazis and the swastika, I have to really pause and explain the swastika, what it stands for, the history behind it, where it comes from, and so on and so on. Whereas I think, 5, 10, 15 years ago, you didn't have to necessarily get so in-depth into it that people understood this is a swastika, it's a symbol of the Nazis, it's a hate symbol, end of discussion. It's not so simple today. So we have to do both things at the same time. And I also loved what you said earlier about your own personal connection to this, because I think you hit the nail on the head, maybe without even realizing it, that, you care so much about the history because you know so many people within that community. And I think that speaks to, I think when we talk about just where does hatred come from? It comes from the fear of the unknown, right? Or us versus them. But when you really get to know them, you can't really hate them. It becomes a lot easier to hate someone when you don't know them, And that's, part of why when it comes to, let's say, the gas chambers of these, death camps during the Holocaust, they weren't looking these people in the eyes as they were murdering them. They were putting them in a room, locking them in, and then next thing you know, they were murdered. So I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, is that if we just took the time to get to know people from other cultures and other communities, we would find that we have so much more in common than we realized. And there's no reason to hate them just because they're quote unquote different, or they look different, or they have a different way of life or belief system, right? So as we finish here, I'd love to end with your kind of words of advice to anyone listening, whether they be an educator or not an educator, who feels passionately in the way that you and I do, but they don't know where to begin. They don't know, how do I bring this into the classroom? Or if they're, let's say, a parent or a grandparent, how do I bring this to my local school system and make sure that the parents are teaching this, or that the teachers are putting this into the curriculum? So do you have any words of advice for anyone listening on that?
Read books. I think books are, and when I say read books, it could be audiobooks, it really could be movies too. But just focus on human stories. Like, that is always the pathway to getting anyone, kids, adults, to care about something. And I think, find stories to uplift and to center, in terms of, try not to. One of the reasons I love Salvage Pages is it's a whole collection. So I was always able to be like, oh, I'm assigning the brother and sister diary to these students who I know have siblings, or I'm assigning this kid who, is so motivated and driven and obsessed with school to someone who's obsessed with school. And so it really is helpful. But even if I just had one book, finding pathways, you know what I mean? Like, just finding ways to talk about, we have Jewish athletes that we can uplift, and some of them have, ties to Holocaust survivors. Some of them don't, but like, we can talk about where they come from, right? I just wrote a curriculum for, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget his name. Salomo. He was a boxer in Salonika. But like, it was a very interesting story, and he, never lost a fight. And then, he moved to Tel Aviv after the war. And so even that just 3-minute story is a great way to just engage a group of kids, like maybe in a boxing club, and just show how all these stories can relate to just our everyday human experiences. I think that we just forget when we're talking about groups of people and we're talking about numbers, that we're talking about individuals. And so it can be really daunting to figure out how to teach the Holocaust. Like, well, how do I teach? Just start with one, because, I think my students, I'm obviously synonymous with the Holocaust. I think when they think of me, they send me things all the time, but almost all of them can remember me talking about Peter Gins, or me talking about, Luang from the Cambodian genocide. Like, they associate not just the topic and the class, but the people. And that's something I'm really proud of, that they can do that.
Absolutely. So they remember the people and those stories. Whereas if you just stood there in a history class and did 30 minutes of the Holocaust and the Nazis and the invasion and this date, that date, this date, they're not necessarily going to remember. That doesn't necessarily speak to them in that same way. So I fully agree with everything you're saying. Thank you so much, Kelly, for being here today. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much, as always, for joining us for another incredible episode here at HMTV. Again, my name is Zach Graulich, and I am the Assistant Director of Education here for Education in Motion. Thank you so much, and find more of our podcast at hmtcli.org.